Christopher Nolan's Odyssey has been getting a lot of criticism. Some people have argued that the film deviates too much from original story, that certain characters aren't portrayed the way they are in Homer's poem. Certain things have been left out, reinterpreted, and Nolan clearly receives part of the journey. And honestly, they are right. Nolan did change some parts, but there is something we sometimes forget when talking about adaptations. An adaptation is not a detailed recreation of original. An adaptation is an artist taking an existing story and interpreting it through their own medium, their own perspective, and their own way of storytelling. And if there is one thing Nolan has always been interested in, it's what's happening inside his characters. He takes factors like time, memory, war, obsession, guilt, identity, and turns them into something psychological. And that's what makes his Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, so interesting. Because beneath all gods, monsters, and epic battles is a man whose greatest strength is also his greatest weakness, his mind. He's intelligent, he's clever, and that keeps him alive. But what if it's also keeping him from finding his peace? What if Odyssey is not simply about Odysseus finding his way home, but about him learning that not everything can be controlled or understood? In order to understand the story Nolan tried to tell with Odyssey, we need to know about the character of his Odysseus. Just like the poem, Odysseus does not want to be the fastest or the strongest, but he always tries to be the smartest. Trojan War is probably the clearest example of that. While everyone else were thinking about how to break through the walls of Troy, Odysseus found a way inside it without breaking through the walls, and in doing so, he broke Zeus's rule, which we will talk about later in this video. When Odysseus enters Polyphemus' cave with his men and realizes they are trapped with one-eyed monster, he waits and thinks before making any move. He realizes that killing Polyphemus will lead to them being trapped inside that cage forever. He makes a plan to escape in the morning while Polyphemus walks out of the cave. This shows how intelligent Odysseus really is. When he encounters Circe, he does not simply fall into the same trap as his men. He senses something is off, he recognizes what's happening, finds a way to resist her power, turns the situation around by manipulating her, and saves his men, showing his cleverness. He is so cunning, he always tries to turn every situation in his favor and succeeds every time. But just like every Nolan's character, Odysseus has a flaw rooted deep into his psychology. Along with intelligence and cleverness, Odysseus possesses pride, curiosity, and the need to understand and control everything. And that might be the reason why part of Odysseus may not have wanted to return home. Part of Odysseus may not have wanted to return home. Throughout the movie, we are told this is a man desperate to get home. Ithaca is waiting for him. Penelope is waiting for him. His son is growing up without him. So you think that after everything he's been through, getting home would be his biggest wish. But Nolan's Odysseus does not feel that simple. Maybe he wants to go home, but maybe he's afraid to. What does home mean to him after Troy? Odysseus left Ithaca as a noble king, a husband, and a father. He spent years at war where he saw death, violence, and things he can't simply forget. He watched Troy burn to the ground while innocent women and children were killed. And it's his trick to break the walls of Troy that caused all of this. This is where the story becomes much more relatable. We often imagine homecoming as a happy ending. But what if you come back and you have changed? What if the place you spent years dreaming about no longer feels like the place you remember due to the heavy guilt that you feel in your chest? In the underworld, When Odysseus talks to Agamemnon and sees what has happened to him, suddenly his obsession with control we talked about earlier becomes much more important. Odysseus starts asking, is it safe for him to return home? Can he trust Penelope? Can he still belong at Ithaca? While those thoughts were lingering in his mind, Calypso found him. She took care of him and fell in love with him. Odysseus loved Penelope, but Calypso gave him something nobody could, the ability to forget. He can finally stop carrying the guilt of Troy around with him. He does not have to face the men he left behind in the war and on his way home. For the first time, he does not think and try to control everything, but simply lives. And maybe that's why leaving Calypso and returning home was not as easy for him as it should be. There is something really strange about the gods in Nolan's Odyssey. They are everywhere in the story. They talk about Zeus, they fear Poseidon, but we don't really see them. And I don't think that's an accident, because Nolan has done this on purpose. He gives us a story where magic might be real, but he never asks us to believe it. Even the opening of the movie describes this as a time of apparent magic. And I think this is one of those things that can make us misunderstand what Nolan is doing with this story. Because we went into the Odyssey expecting Greek mythology. We expected gods to appear and perform miracles. But Nolan does not give us that certainty. He gives us something ambiguous, something open ended. The possibility that gods might exist and the possibility they might not depends on our interpretation. And this is where Athena becomes impossible to ignore. Odysseus sees her and she speaks to him. She guides him. But then there's that face. The face of Priestess he saw die during the fall of Troy. And suddenly we are left wondering, is that really Athena? Did the goddess take the form of the woman Odysseus could not save? Or is Odysseus hallucinating the face of someone whose death he is guilty of? Odysseus has just come from a war where his idea, the Trojan horse, helped destroy the entire city of Troy. He knows innocents died, so when Athena begins appearing to him in the form of the priestess who he could not save, it becomes almost impossible to separate whether Athena really is standing in front of him or if his mind has taken everything he feels about Troy, his guilt, his grief, his questions about his morality, and given it a face. Nolan is not telling us that the gods aren't real. He's making us question whether what Odysseus sees is actually coming from the gods or from his own mind. When the sea and the sky turn against Odysseus, is that really Zeus and Poseidon punishing him, or was it simply a natural catastrophe and Odysseus, desperate to make sense of everything, sees it as the work of gods? Are gods really interacting with Odysseus, or is it just the manifestation of his guilt and PTSD after war? There is something almost ironic about the way Odysseus finally gets home, because for most of his journey, he tries to control everything. Even when gods seem to be against him, he keeps trying to find another way out. And then, at some point, he stops. He stops trying to control and lets go of everything. He lets the sea take him and he finally reaches Ithaca. Think about how strange that is. The man who spent years trying to control his journey finally gets where he is trying to go when he stops trying to control the journey. But that does not suddenly make Odysseus change his ways. When he gets to Ithaca, he immediately tries to control everything. He disguises himself as a beggar. He watches everyone and analyzes the situation. He tries to understand who is loyal and who is not. He does not just simply walk into his own palace and take back his throne. His instinct is to calculate. Eventually, he decides to take his kingdom back. He fights the suitors, all 108 of them. At first glance, this looks like the ultimate return of the old Odysseus, the clever king finally taking control of his kingdom. But I think there is something different about him by this time. He's no longer fighting because he believes he can control everything. He's fighting because this is something he needs to face. And that's an important difference we can relate with our own lives. Letting go does not mean becoming passive and allowing others to destroy our lives. Sometimes we have to fight and make a choice. But there is a difference between fighting what you can't change and spending your entire life trying to change what you can't. And Odysseus finally seems to understand that because after everything, the war, the gods, the seas, the years away from Ithaca, he accepts that not everything can be controlled. And honestly, I think that's the biggest change in him. Movie was not just about a clever king defying all hurdles to finally return home. That story has been read and told for 3000 years. Nolan tried to give a story that all of us can relate to in some ways. Most of us keep checking our phones, waiting for someone's reply. We try to control what someone thinks of us, or we try forcing the outcome we already know we can't change. We can't control everything and we need to accept it. And that's what Odysseus eventually ends up doing. After spending his entire life trying to control everything around him, he finally understands that coming home is not about controlling the journey, it's about knowing when to let go.